These are, again, have been evolving. We are looking at different processes for private streets, lane widths, thinking about bike lanes and sidewalk widths. What we're coming forward with will be, again, frontage types, on adjacent street and the building setbacks from the front of the line, and the private street will probably have some cross sections going parallel parking and also bike lanes where it makes sense. It's kind of an example of a streetscape. In this case, with parallel parking, we are probably replacing that with, or this is bike parking, rather, probably replacing that with parallel parking so that we can narrow the street. And not have so many people driving. Again, there's other alternatives. And then also thinking about building relationships to the streets. In some cases, they may not have a sidewalk, or they can create space, perhaps along the drive, and then parking along the street, bringing the building toward the street, creating green space and wide sidewalks and lighting. Obviously, it's critical that we provide access to coastal resources. And so these standards apply within the city's jurisdiction. It would be those that are adjacent to the coastal jurisdiction line. It would not require direct access to the water per se, but it would require that you have a permanent recorded easement for the length of that parallel to the coastal jurisdiction line for each property. And there are a series of specifications regarding widths of the overall easement, walking surface types and widths, making sure they're of course accessible. And maintenance would be due to the property owner unless it's dedicated and accepted by the city, in which case the city would accept the maintenance of those facilities. And then, as Laura alluded to, resilience is a critical piece of this, recognizing that property is a special flood hazard area. So we've had many conversations and gone over this. Essentially, a development applicant would need to demonstrate that they could provide either a letter of map amendment or a letter of map revision or a conditional letter of map revision. And they would be required to provide documentation certified by licensed engineers confirming that they're able to comply with all local, state, and federal compliance. So the first two items there are one or the other, and the last, the documentation by an engineer, would be a requirement. There is also standards relative to base flood elevation +2, so bringing usable areas above the base flood elevation, making sure that there's dry access for both pedestrians and that there is passable at all times for any emergency equipment to move in and out. Making sure that people will be able to evacuate out of the building and out of the special flood hazard area safely. And then also there's a requirement for a flood emergency operations plan for development within this area.
Just before we continue, I just want to note that a quote from the water store. Let's continue. Thank you, Brett. So I'll comment a little bit on some of our next steps in the process. Overall, some of you may be aware that we are in process on the revision of the comprehensive plan, the Plan of Conservation and Development, our POCD, which needs to be updated and adopted every 10 years. And we've just started that revision. The idea is that that lays the groundwork for a broader revision of the zoning ordinance, and we are foreshadowing that revision with this proposal. And that we have started to propose some form-based elements that haven't been part of our zoning code before. And that is, as you may be aware, many communities have realized that it's not only use that impacts the way people interact with spaces in the city, it's the actual form of the building, how it's situated, what sort of pedestrian access ways are provided, open space requirements. These are all things that we haven't envisioned as broadly in our zoning ordinance because it was adopted at the time when use was the primary factor. So, you know, I do envision that the zoning ordinance would be overhauled following the comprehensive plan. But we wanted to use this opportunity to foreshadow that. And to do that, in addition to what is before you, we have envisioned a supplement to this proposal that would, that we've started, that would also envision the site design as we touched on today. I'm sorry, the street elements, but site design in addition, including pedestrian priority areas, buffering requirements, building design, including orientation and massing of scale and form and facades. So we know that there are many people in the New Haven, greater New Haven community that would like to comment on that sort of design and have a lot of ideas about what could happen, as well as landscaping and buffering. That would be part of our supplemental proposal that would we anticipate would be before you in the next 3 to 6 months. So this is the legislation committee. As I mentioned, we do have a moratorium in place that will expire in September. So we're hoping for adoption of this legislation by then. The standards that we just mentioned, noted here today too, but will be supplemental. And I did want to mention that we have read through the testimony that you see before you. You should also have, I believe, copies of the City Plan Commission recommendation, and they moved this as a positive recommendation. So that is for the text amendment and the zoning map amendment. They're two separate items. We have read through the testimony that you've received and are happy to comment on that if you wish, you know, to go through that kind of point. But I want to express my gratitude to those who took time to read through the entire ordinance and comment on it. It is actually really helpful to have feedback from consultants or specialists like those who are here today, you know, with particular interest in mind, but also with a really keen eye for things that we probably will want to update in the text. So some of those things I've noted, we're happy to comment on other things, but if we do have an opportunity to make changes, we don't have a red line before you right now with those proposed changes because there is quite a lot, but we've taken a lot of that apart. And in particular, you know, I do want to mention that the testimony from Alloy is particularly important. They're a major employer. We respect their comments on the ordinance and would continue to work with them on how to best move forward. So, of course, we're recommending approval. We thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Thank you, Director from the team. I just want to thank you for all of your hard work on this. I'm sure it's been quite a year, and particularly very busy last 6 months. I think at this point I'm going to turn it over to the community for questions. David?
Sure. Thank you. Madam Chair, I have a bunch of questions, so maybe I'll ask a few of them and I'll hand it off to colleagues. Starting back. As Madam Chair said, I also want to thank you for the hard work on this. I think it definitely aligns with what I would like to see happen on Leavenworth and you know, many parts of the city with trying to, you know, build more housing and make it easier for people to walk and take public transit and bike to get around and have lots of, you know, retail and restaurants and all sorts of things going on the street. Some of the things that make New Haven such a special place. I guess I'll start by just saying that I do have a sort of broad concern about the proposal here, and that I wonder, it's very prescriptive. Like we are saying very specific things about what we want to see happen, and there are only a certain type of development that basically that would be able to comply with what we're asking for. And you know, Longworth is presents a huge, very important opportunity for us because it's a huge amount of land that hasn't been developed in this with this type of intensity before. And it is pretty close to the city center. And as was said earlier, we need a lot more housing. There was a big report out about that just this month, last month. But I think one concern I have is just about the feasibility maybe of some of what we're hoping for, because, you know, I lived downtown for a few years and I would go to Long Wharf occasionally. I would bike over to Long Wharf to get some tacos on the wharf. But it is not a very pleasant trip to make without a car. And what we're envisioning here is a really pedestrian and bike and public transit focused development. That was something that was raised in some of the public testimony, was that we are setting parking maximums that, you know, it's a cause that I am broadly supportive of, but I think I do worry about like how much that's going to work, just because if we're expecting, you know, maybe 1,000 people to live, I don't know, that's one of my questions, but a lot of people live in this part of the city. It's, you know, one of the reasons why it hasn't been developed maybe is the zoning, but another reason why it hasn't been developed is that it's pretty much cut off from the rest of the city by the train tracks and highways, and getting from it to our major employers in downtown business area is not that easy or pleasant, as I said before. So I guess one thing, broadly speaking, that I would like to see is sort of if there's thoughts or planning about how to improve that experience. Like I think the State Street corridor improvements that's happening in my ward, Ward 6, on the border of Ward 8 as well, is sort of what we need, but it doesn't go all the way to Long Wharf, and it just stops on Water Street. And so if that was to extend to Long Wharf, then I think that would put us in a better position to sort of realize the kind of development we're hoping for. Right now, I just am worried that we're hoping that all these people are going to live in this part of town that is pretty cut off from the rest of the city. So that's just some comments to start. I do wonder about so specific questions. One is about the special permits that are required in the zoning table here. As I said before, we're being very prescriptive about the type of development that we want to see. It's got to be over 100 units per acre. You know, we're going down to like the type of trash disposal that needs to exist in the apartment buildings that get built here. So I guess I wonder why we are requiring special permits for mid and high rise development, also for something like a hotel. It feels like, given that we have inclusionary zoning applying and all, like, you know, pages and pages of requirements for what kind of development, it seems we're like designing the developments ourselves. I guess I wonder why we are asking for special permits for proposed developments. It seems like if they comply with all the things that we have asked them to do, then they would be compliant. They would be fitting with what we would want. So I wonder why it's the requirement of a special permit.
Yes, thank you. So this is a question that has come up a lot in our discussions, and because this is in the special, Long Wharf is in the special flood hazard area, the Coastal Management Act, a state regulation, is very clear about what is allowable and what is encouraged in the special flood hazard area. And residential development or intensification of development is generally discouraged in the special flood hazard area. So we had many conversations with DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, about ways that we could do this. We're not the only Connecticut community that's attempting to increase development in the special flood hazard area. But in order to do this, we felt it was really important that we include provisions that not broadly allow development without some checks and balances that make to ensure the safety of residents in this area should there be a flood hazard. And that is in alignment with the state regulations as well, that again, discourages intensification in the special flood hazard area. So as a provision, in order to move forward with what we envision as intensification, we believe that the special permit criteria would both ensure that the developers are providing the kind of resilience measures that we think are necessary and that our partners at DEEP agreed were necessary to ensure the safety of residents. So that is why there are certain uses that would require a special permit on long-term. I do want to mention that the envisioned MU district was envisioned as something that could be applied citywide. Outside of Long Wharf, most of what we're talking about today is the kind of provisions that would apply inside Long Wharf. But that is why the use table includes some differences for those things on Long Wharf. So yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know very much about the state's laws regarding special flood hazard areas. I wonder whether, I guess it seems to me like we wrote out a lot of requirements related to flood management and that risk. And so I guess what we're saying is that we feel like those requirements don't go far enough, or we're not necessarily sure that they're going to achieve everything that we need related to safety, because we need to have the special permit process as an additional check. Is that right?
Well, not all residential, in other zones, residential wouldn't necessarily require a special permit, but we're requiring that for residential in the MU on work for that reason.
Right. I just mean there is a lot of requirements in this zoning amendment related to flood risk management. Right.
They are mainly in the special provisions for the MU district, which is
Right.
section 43.3.
Right.
Would be the special permit criteria for that would apply to anything requiring.
Okay. Understood. So are we limiting the focus of the special permit to the question of complying with the flood risk management provisions, or is it more broad special permit process?
I'm not sure.
Like, we have zoning hearings about all sorts of development all over the city, and there are many ways in which city planning commission could deny a project. And I'm wondering whether we are hoping that the issues which the city planning commission could decide, over which the city planning commission could decide to deny a project, are only related to flood risk management, or if they are more broad than just flood risk management.
The special permit criteria would apply. There are general special permit criteria that are in the ordinance as well. So those would apply. These would be additional criteria. Let our deputy director of zoning comment further.
Right, yeah, so as Laura mentioned, there's the general special permit criteria that is already in the ordinance. And this additional criteria would be to ensure resiliency strategies within the MU districts. So anything requiring a special permit within the MU as the already established special permit criteria, and this is an addition to make sure that those are those resiliency matters. So
Understood. Okay. So I guess my question is, do we think that it could make sense? When I asked you why we were asking for a special permit process, the only thing you mentioned was the worry about flood risk management. So I guess wondering whether it could make sense to limit the purview of the special permit process to the flood risk management issue, since that seems to be what we're worried about, as opposed to applying the broad special permit process that applies to all special permits.
So we saw it as similar as, there's special exception criteria, for example, for the BZA or the zoning appeals. But when it comes to neighborhood convenient uses for section 31, there's additional criteria that's being met specific to uses within those residential districts. We thought it'd be a similar process, whereas you have the general special permit criteria, and then these would be in addition to that based on where developments being located in the city and potential for risks. So you have just, so yeah, very similar to the process that we have for, section 31 as far as neighborhood convenience uses go. So yeah, in addition to, as opposed to just those.
I think we should consult with council to see if what you're suggesting is possible.
I don't know whether it is. I'm just wondering because it feels like, one thing that was raised in some of the testimony that we received is, we are, as I said before, we're expecting very large scale development to happen here. Minimum 100 units, it could be like at least like $30 million projects. And if someone who is thinking about if someone who's thinking about developing on Longwood looks at our zoning code and sees that they have to go through a special permit process, that might discourage them from pursuing it because they have no certainty whether they're going to receive approval, because the special permit process is somewhat arbitrary to some extent. There's the involvement of the city planning commission, right, in making a determination about whether to grant it. And if we were to limit the purview of that special permit process only to the flood risk management, which seems like what we're concerned about, then that would maybe make potential developers feel confident in their approvals if they follow the guidelines that we laid out, which seem very reasonable because of our concerns. So that's sort of my question. Again, I'm not sure if that's a possible thing to do, and my colleague who is on the city planning commission would have a better idea, but I do wonder just about the special permit, the need for the requirement for the special permit, and that, again, because we're being so prescriptive here, being a possible roadblock to the development we want to see happen.
Thank you. I think we need to explore that a little bit further to see if it's possible. I would say that it's not unusual for developments of the kind that are envisioned to seek a special permit. It's a fairly common process.
Yeah, I also like to add that the special permit process can happen simultaneously with site plan review. You don't get approval from one or the other. They can be applied for and approved at the same CPC hearing. And if they were to be as of right, well, essentially, yeah, but yeah, I mean, as if we were to make, certain uses that are required by special permit, like residential, for example, as of right, the current site plan review process wouldn't necessarily enforce the resiliency requirements they're trying to do.
So, since we brought up the coastal flood plan, we received a letter today from can you comment on, we also received, I think, a red line copy of a special provision for the end user. Can you talk a little bit about, the consideration, the comments from deep, and how related that is?
Yeah, how would you like me to address them? Point by point?
Yes. Oh, thank you.
Yep. So yeah, the first comment from Deep is on page 2 under comments, the special provision process. So this is with regard to the first set of special provisions that are in the ordinance. And they had just suggested adding the word "and" instead of "or" to make more of those requirements applicable, which we are reviewing, but generally in support of the, as we've described, these are all things that we believe are applicable. The dry egress requirement is another thing that they've described, and they did, like you said, provide a red line here that shows their edits. So I just want to go back to that first request. You can see the "and" that they've added. I have myself because there's a lot of markup here, but the "and" in between number 2 and number 1. So production of the letter of map revision and present evidence in the form of written documentation certified by the legislature. The second comment is with regard to dry egress and engineers, and do you want to discuss?
Sure, yeah, thank you, again, for having us here tonight. You know, really kind of stepping back from the letter for a second, kind of talking about the approach here. Again, these sort of more sensitive uses that would be marked by having subject to a special permit, you know, obviously in deference to your points, all for saving. They would have these more stringent standards. And really the thought is that this whole area really was built to build a highway, and we stopped 3 feet short, you know, where we would need them to go now. And really the best way, instead of trying to, you know, mess around with dry flood proofing, wet flood proofing, all these sort of, gimmicks, if you will, in the code, trying to raise ourselves out of it. And that's where the FEMA process, that first flood safety process here, is so important, where we're able to remap ourselves out of the flood hazard zones for these developments, and then obviously the attendant infrastructure around it. You know, dry egress, very important, right? And there's the way the ordinance is written, it contemplates essentially two flavors of egress. The first is, you know, you're in the middle. Imagine you're in a big hurricane, the biggest hurricane you've ever had, much bigger than Sandy, you know, probably bigger than the Hurricane 38. You know, you're in the middle of that, and that's one problem. And then suddenly you have another problem. The building catches fire. What do you do, right? And so that's where this first provision, where you provide pedestrian egress at base flood elevation plus 2 feet, 2 feet above the maximum we can, you know, FEMA predict the water is going to go to a safe space outside of the building, right? So that's the first. The second thing that the ordinance is requiring is that at all times there has to be a way for emergency vehicles to come in and out of the city. If you think about it, during this really big event, you know, our high water events last about 6 hours, 3 hours, tide. We have 6 feet of tide in New Haven, so really you don't get that really top level of flood for, you know, really long periods of time, unlike, you know, communities to the north of us around rivers where you really can flood for days at a time. You know, we're really looking at a 6 hour period. So being able to get emergency vehicles in and out in a time where there's almost certainly a travel ban on the streets, so getting personal vehicles in and out is really an issue. It's all about emergency vehicle access, and that really doesn't have to necessarily be at base flood elevation plus 2. You know, that could even be as far down as base flood elevation. So those two things in concert provide that level of safety where we don't have, the goal here is not to evacuate these more sensitive uses in the MU zone as they're built. So you have a big residential building, for example, you know, say you have 1,000 people in there, it catches fire, there's somewhere for them to go out of the building that is well above our base flood elevation, at base flood plus 2. Then at the same time, there's a path that our emergency vehicles are guaranteed, even the worst event that we plan for, to be able to come and go from that side. So deep comments a fair amount on that. And I think there's some very specific language about property boundaries and things like that that it's still going back and forth on. You know, big thanks to them. I think they really sort of thought hard about what we were proposing here. And I think it shows some movement of thinking on their part. You know, they've been fairly blanket on this sort of stuff on intensification. I think it's sort of different to treat New Haven, which is a very built environment, traditional environment. Lest we forget, the water was 30,000 feet closer to downtown only 60 years ago. You know, from their sort of one size fits all commentary on this. And you can hear that in the tenor of this letter versus previous letters that the board has received, you know, most recently on PED in this area. So, you know, we're still working on some of the wordsmithing. I think the letter at the end of the day recognizes the intentions that we have in the ordinance, and I think kind of agrees in general concept with our approach.
Thank you. Yeah, there was, I'll just add, there was quite, we had discussions with Steve prior, and there's quite a lot of alignment on the nature of the special provisions for the MU. So this is a matter of coming to some language. So that's why they proposed the language that engineers had mentioned. The future flood control system, they did mention, as a comment to, for the city's awareness of what the existing or proposed infrastructure would protect, and the city is aware of that. So that was not, that was more of a comment and not something that substantively impacted the ordinance. The water dependent priority language, we noted that in the past, our water dependent uses on Longworth and around the city have been largely industrial in nature. And there may be water dependent uses that are synergistic with what's envisioned in the Longworth Responsible Growth Plan. So I think we do need to consider that a little bit more carefully, see if there are some things that would be appropriate. As it stands, we had not a lot of water dependent uses because they were largely industrial in nature and would not be synergistic with the plan. But I think we want to visit that a little bit to see if we can potentially, like I said, with the use. And that they certainly do encourage water dependent use for parcels that are on the water. So they would like to see that.
If I may really quickly, I think it's worth noting that the primary water dependent use in the district now is both petroleum. And while DEPA does not mention that in their letter, rather they make some other uses that are more hypothetical. I think there's a little shift here on the waterfront because the larger macroeconomic trends around fossil fuels. And so it's, I think there's an anachronism in Connecticut law around water dependency and water dependent uses. I think that our ordinance really kind of pushes more the recreational value of that waterfront on this side of the harbor, understanding fully that the large for.
I think that was the nature of that comment.
Thank you. To move it over there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Of course, I want to join my colleagues in thanking all of you for your work on this. It's ambitious in a variety of ways. I noted that, maybe not in those exact words in our commission meeting last week, that there's a lot here that represents new approaches to zoning. For example, looking maximums instead of minimums, minimum densities instead of maximum densities, moving towards a form-based code. There's a lot here. Using incentives in a way that rewards greater sustainability and resilience features with yet greater density, which on one hand might seem kind of contradictory. So there's a lot to think about, a lot to ponder. I have about 1,000 questions, but I'm really going to ask a couple because the answer to these next two questions will inform me and hopefully the rest of the community about how much time we have to think about this. I heard from you, Engineer Sin and Director Brown, that there's more work to be done in understanding everything that was in the deep letter and figuring out the proper responses in terms of potential recommended amendments to this. We are in receipt of letters from attorneys who represent developers who are looking to build in the farm in the sports stadium site. We received a letter from BoA representatives of these organizations are here and they'll have a chance to testify. But they recommend a number of changes. And then I heard you, Director Brown, say that there's revisions in the offing, potential revisions in the offing, which we don't have in front of us now. So for me, the question I have is more about time, because I see that there's two competing things going on here. On the one hand, there's the imperative that we do a good job, right? And so that means taking the appropriate time to consider potential amendments that are not actually before us, in which we can't even see. Two, there's a much more moratorium that's going to expire, like next month. So I'm trying to understand how we do both of those things. And how does the committee actually make a recommendation to the full Board of Alders about a piece of legislation that's not in its final form? Especially around zoning. This is not like a small ordinance change that's really about 3 words for an ordinance about left-handed whistleblowing except of a certain decibel level on festival day. I mean, I'm making up a random example. This is zoning for a huge portion of our, so this, I have 1,000 questions, and if we have another meeting, I could ask those questions. But if we, I don't know how we pass, how we take action on this tonight. And even if you're recommending that we do, so I want to ask you.
Yeah, so, I mean, like I said, we've read through, I have personally read through all the testimony, staff have read through the testimony. We have ideas about those things that would be relatively easy for, us to discuss and recommend, but like you said, there may be things that we want a little bit more time to think through. And we agree, and I also, am very grateful, like I said, for the testimony, because I think that we end up with better legislation in the end when we have that opportunity to think it through and pass legislation that makes sense the most sense. So if there was an opportunity to allow those here to testify, but keep the hearing open for another meeting, my understanding of the process is that the Board of Alders would hear this for our first, there would be 2 meetings of the Board of Alders to adopt this. So if the legislation committee was to make a recommendation, it would ideally be heard at first and second reading by the Board of Alders prior to the middle of September. And I think that would still be possible if there was another meeting of the legislation committee that I would urge the parents to discuss.
So that's something we'll have to discuss in the deliberations about the possibility of finding out when the next legislation meeting could happen and whether or not it could on the 23rd that the director is referencing. My own sense, Madam Chair, for what it's worth, is that it makes me more comfortable as a member of this committee to be able to deliberate and vote on a recommendation when we have the recommended final form of process, especially when it comes to zoning text and map. So just a couple of details that. And I think Deputy Director Hoagland answered that, but I want to verify. When I looked at the use table, I had never seen a column before that had 2 letters in it. S/R. R/SP, right? And it's like either or, both and. I've never seen that. It's always just been 1 letter. So then you made reference to something about long wharf, inside long wharf, outside long wharf. What do you mean? Show us the map. I need to know how crystal clear that definition is, because me having 2 letters in 1 column in use table sounds like a particularly bad idea.
I'll go back to that one. All right, so you see in the top right corner, it says special permit in yellow, I guess that is. I'll put the white side on that. And in white, it says R, which is outside long wharf. So the reasoning behind that is because we realized that the MU district could have potential outside of the long wharf boundary area. And we were hoping to utilize this elsewhere in the city. So keeping that in mind, with the additional, special permit criteria for coastal resiliency and things like that, we acknowledge that there's certain uses that would, require that criteria of a special permit within the long wharf boundary area. With any district wherever to be utilized outside long wharf, within the long wharf boundary area, if you want to pull the map up. So yeah, so it was used outside this red area, the proposed boundary that is currently as quote unquote long wharf, then this secondary column would prevail. That answer your question?
I'm going to attempt to summarize what you just said, and that will reveal whether I understood it or not. Everything in here that's red is long wharf.
Yep. And that is
So everything that is in the long wharf column of that sub-column of the use table column, which is the white letter, that applies.
the orange.
The orange is long wharf, okay. Yellow, orange, whatever.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, to me, that seems odd. Because why wouldn't you just say multi-use LW? Let's have it be its own zone. And then create a different zone that's like multi-use, not long wharf. I understand. It's like, why would you have in a use column multiple choices? It just seems odd. It seems like those are 2 different zones. They could be related zones. You have BD1, BD2, BD3, and they're similar, right? Why not have MU1, MU2? Because the thing I'm worried about is just any ambiguity or any confusion for people who are looking at that use table.
I think, Brent would like to answer that, all right?
Please.
Yeah, so as we were drafting this, we want to make sure that it's could be universally applied. The vast majority of the standards could apply anywhere in the city. Then there are those standards that are there because of being a special flood hazard area. So there's only certain uses that those apply to. So the column in the use table spell out that this particular use within the area that's, there in the red, would be special permit. Otherwise, it would be, permitted outright. And the only reason that it would be required by special permit is because it's within flood hazard area. So rather than creating the same district where 90% of everything applies and 10% is different because of being a special flood hazard area, we simply just, in that one instance, we just created that column. You could create two columns and just say mixed use, long work, mixed use everywhere else. And that's just the most efficient way of doing it. For the form.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm just going to think about that. Back to the map, if you want. All right. And of course, when we pass the text amendment, we have the meets and bounds and we have like GPS coordinates and stuff like that, right? So we're very, when we, the thing I'm focusing on is no ambiguity about what area is the special flood hazard area. What if FEMA later on enlarges that area with that? So these are some of the things I'm thinking about when you're kind of baking in features that are particular to a particular, that are specific to a particular FEMA measurement. What happens if that measurement changes? Do we have to go back and amend the ordinance, redraw the map? I'm just trying to think about what the mechanism is.
I think it would be obviously the MU zone, whatever provisions are in the MU zone are applied across this. It depends on whether that property is also in the special flood hazard area at the time of application. So if say we approve a development that is not in the special flood hazard zone, and then 10 years later it's in, we don't force that development to come back and redo everything unless they were coming in for something that triggered again the land use process of the city, at which point they would have to comply with the standards in place at that time and the status of the special flood hazard at that time.
Right. So I understand how we approach individual applications, right? It's just if there's a special flood hazard designation that is playing an important role in determining which uses are as a right versus special permit, right? And if FEMA decides to expand that special flood zone elsewhere into the city, we would have to then revisit our regulations and see what any changes we would want to make in response to that. So maybe
I would note that there are special flood hazard areas elsewhere on the other places.
Okay. I guess I'm just coming back to what I think about having a zone that has subzones built within one zone as opposed to closely related zones that are separate zones. So I'm just going to think about that.
May I add one
Sure.
comment? So, in considering a text amendment or the addition of a zone change, that is something we typically do more broadly in consideration of the city's needs and not necessarily a particular parcel or area. Of course, here we have special provisions which require a special criteria for those parcels in the special flood hazard area. But when the map amendment is made, it is not my understanding, and the council can comment on this further at another time, but that the special flood hazard map is not part, that was a consideration development of the zone and of the map change, but that wouldn't be a consideration necessarily in the consideration of a particular application. Once the map change is adopted, that the criteria associated with that zone apply. Am I understanding that correctly? So we do have the GIS data that delineates the area that we that we are proposing to adopt. But that's not contingent on the special flood hazard area map.
Yes. Thank you for that. I'm gonna conclude my questions for now. And I guess the question for you, Madam Chair, is whether or not we want the city staff to address any of the concerns that came up from the other letters, or should we wait until after we hear from those folks directly? You know, what would be more productive? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Just to follow up on my colleague's questions related to the two zoning designations within this one column. I guess just from a readability standpoint, I do think it might be productive to, you know, the use table starts on page 21 and ends on page 31. And, you know, I was reading the use table and I saw the slash and I had to find what it was. And then I got to page 31 and it explains what it is. And I think it might be good to try to put it elsewhere in the use table so that if someone was trying to figure out what that is, it would be easier to find. Just a thought. Then I also, following up on another question about the timing here, I was wondering if we felt that we weren't ready to vote this out committee tonight, or there wasn't sufficient time for another meeting of the legislation committee, if it would be possible to extend the moratorium on modeling, or if that's something that's necessary for a month or two, to give us more time to think about the very ambitious, as my colleague said, proposal that's required.
I believe that would be a board holder action to do that.
Right.
Rod, do you want to comment on what that process is?
I believe it's an amendment of an ordinance, so the time is very tight, because I think it has to go through 2 meetings. So,
Yes, although, I mean, I think that could be something that, you know, this is a decision for you know, the full board of aldermen to make, obviously, but something that potentially could happen through, since we already passed the law more zoning, we have already passed the moratorium, we agreed as a body that we supported that idea. It doesn't seem like it seems like it could be reasonable for the board, through potentially unanimous consent or some sort of expedited process, to extend the moratorium by a month or two without having to go through committee.
I'm not an expert on the process, but I'm very conservative in these situations, and so if there's, I don't know that this is something that can get unanimous consent.
Me too. I'm seeing a shaking head from my colleagues, so maybe not. I will move on to another question I have, which is about affordable housing. And I think it was noted somewhere in here that that this area is part of the 4 zone in the inclusionary zone map, and I was just want to confirm if that's the case. Oh, sorry, I don't know. That's you.
Yeah, so section 43C3 mentions the IZ component of this. And so basically we have the MU districts is subject to the inclusionary zoning ordinance requiring a minimum percentage of IZ affordable units, because you're right, the MU is in the corner. So the total number of dwelling units permitted exceeds the otherwise allowable density maximum. The unit total given for the IZ ordinance shall prevail. So let's say, based on the density bonuses and everything like that, you're allowed a maximum of 265. IZ bonuses and everything allow for a maximum of 280. The 280 would prevail. So you'd be allowed more based on the IZ than will otherwise allow.
So 25% density bonus would still apply.
Correct. So then it wouldn't apply as far as the bonus scale would be the FAR, because we're no longer, then you doesn't consider FAR as part of it.
Okay,
So parking would still apply the 600 square feet for a gross square.
so the 25% density bonus, which applies to FAR, would not apply because there's no FAR maximum.
We'll see, we'll be able to build a higher, so the FAR bonus, it's a FAR bonus, the density bonus, and the parking, bonus. So the FAR bonus wouldn't apply, but the density bonus would. So
So the density bonus, you mean the gross square?
yeah, so instead of 1,000 square feet of gross square acre, you're down to, I think it's 600 square feet. That would still apply. The zero parking would still apply with that. We are still a larger building.
Because we don't know. Understood.
Just one quick, point of clarification, it is in the wrong.
So that's the 10%.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one other question about retail space. And so basically we received one comment in testimony that was submitted about the maximum height of the first floor, I believe, which this is based on what I remember from the testimony, which I think it said that the maximum in here is 14 feet potentially, and that the standard for retail space is 18 feet maybe. So that seemed like an important note. And so I guess, is that something that we are proposing to change to fit with that suggestion?
Yes, there were a number of comments on design elements that were did by the team representing the 600 Walmart square feet project that we very much appreciated and will be likely to support in the next version. The revisions to the text.
Thank you. And then just continuing on the theme of retail, we in this, we are also, I think, prohibiting ground floor residential development. And I guess I'd wonder sort of if there are thoughts about the feasibility of that and just, how we're envisioning the development of first floors in Longworth, in downtown, and and much of my district, there's a lot of new development, and there are, I think, one of the most common things that's going before the Board of Zoning Appeals right now is variance request to allow residential on first floors. And in a lot of the new developments in my district, there are empty storefronts that have been empty for a long period of time, and those are places with very high foot traffic because they're in the city fabric, whereas Longworth, as I was saying earlier, is a little bit cut off from the rest of the city. So I don't know that I would anticipate a lot of foot traffic from people who aren't living there already or have a specific reason to go there. So that just makes me a little bit worried about the health of retail in this area. And if we're saying that we can't, and we're prohibiting first floor residential, means we're anticipating a lot of retail, I guess. And so I'm just wondering what thoughts are about how we expect that to work.
I have some thoughts, but I wonder if Bradley may be like to comment on that. How we envision that first floor.
Well, generally, there's a number of uses that could go in there other than residential. So, it doesn't mandate that it has to be residential use. It could be parking, for instance. Could have, uses on top of parking. The primary consideration, obviously, is the foot elevation, right? and we don't want to subject property and life to that condition. So it's to get those above the first floor. That is already provision that is in the ordinance too, by the way. You do have provisions for multifamily above the first floor. So if there's any number of uses that could potentially be on, used on that first floor, would have to just be retail.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, excuse me. As Chris said, the first floor residential in combination with upper story residential is permitted by special permit. So that's go through the city planning commission process, and that's basically just to make sure that there's no, you're walking down the street, staring at someone's apartment on the first floor. You want it to be more of a pedestrian friendly retail, I guess, commercial environment to increase that streetscape walkability, as opposed to, being a more intrusive residential component on the.
Right. I definitely understand that and hope that comes to pass. I guess I'm worried, we're trying, it seems like the goals of this is to try to create a very pedestrian friendly environment. We're trying to create streetscapes that people will want to walk around on. I think that we would all probably agree that first floor parking is not a streetscape that is very appealing to walk around on. So I guess I'm just, thinking through that concern. And it's something to think about, I guess. I do have more questions. I don't know if we want to continue, but maybe we should go.
Yeah, I'd like to, plan over, record this for listeners, but I just learned that the code is 7.2, and we saw our first and the night. So I would ask colleagues to please keep it short so that we can get some help. Thank you.
We may have an answer discussion. Asking in reference to how have you reached the residents and the neighboring businesses? And what are they thinking about the change to a no MU and what are some of the concerns that they have? And the other question is, why do we always have to, when we're doing these types of changes in CA, why do we have to universally apply? I share this in the sense that Waldorf is very unique in its own. While we have flood areas throughout the entire city and we have water in all over the city, I think we need to look at the sections for what they are. I mean, should we in the future need to utilize this BCA and apply it to that specific area that we're going to look at? I can understand that. But to universally apply, what are we really doing here today? Are we looking at MU for Longmore? Or are we looking at MU for the entire city? I think there's two issues here. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. To address your second point, when creating a new zoning district, the way that we approach it is to create that without a particular parcel in mind. So it's not, so we're not zoning for a particular parcel. That doesn't mean that zone has to be applied elsewhere in the city. What we are proposing is the application of the MU on Longmore specifically. And it may be in Board of Alders, here's zoning changes. So maybe that the Board of Alders' pleasure is to only use the MU on Longmore. So that's what's being proposed right now. It does not have implications for other parts of the city at this moment, unless the city chooses to use that zone elsewhere. So I'm sorry, what was your
reference to the neighbors?
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Businesses.
So we did have a public meeting in June that was well attended by about 40 residents. And we did a similar presentation. We heard a lot of comments from residents, and I'll say some of them were design related, some of them were not particularly were related to long work, but were not things that could be addressed by the zoning that we're proposing. And then a number of them were actually encouraging of higher density development. So we feel like we've struck a balance here between what we heard and the needs of the city and the constraints that we're under in the area. So we also did significant outreach with the business community through the Economic Development Administration. We met one-on-one with a number of business owners on Long Wharf to just discuss the strategic approach. And we also presented that there's a business development district, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the organization right now, exactly what it's called, but we did have a number of presentations, and also, you know, we're open to comment from any of the business in advance. So, I mean, you'll use these in testimony before you even have to have your, we did, you know, what we heard from the other business owners was largely supportive.
Thank you, Director, and thank you, Madam Chair.
I think at this point, thank you so much for your presentation, for each of our questions. I think at this time we'll open it up to public comment on this item. And should we need feedback, we'll play that.
Thank you.
In the place of the chair, I'll call the first set of people. We have basically two parties who have signed up to testify, and there's more people on the blank sheet over there. The first group is led by Attorney Carolyn Cohn. I believe you all did it here. And then the second is John Melch from BoA. Those are the only parties so far who've indicated that are to testify, but we'll check the final sheet. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please state your names and addresses for the
My name is Carolyn Cohen. I'm counsel to the owner of 600 Longmont, and I live at 131 Park Avenue.
My name is Melinda Adram. I'm a principal at Newman Architect. The architect working with the owner. This is on the Longmont site. We want Team Westwood Road.
Criterion Group, the owner of 200 almost. My address is 2018 Douglas Street.
My name is Travis Shield. I'm also a project manager with the Criterion Group. My address is 1139 49th Avenue, Queens, New York.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your careful reading of our letter as well. I'll try not to repeat it, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the project. We're going to put up a slide that shows it. I realize this is a zoning hearing, not a hearing to review a project, but I see it sort of like America's Test Kitchen, where you're taking, you know, a recipe and you're trying to see how it works when you apply it to a project. And I believe our project is absolutely the kind of project that the city has described as they want more. There'll be approximately 1,500 units in the high rises. There will be a big grocery store, retail and restaurants, and a new street, parking garage, a public plaza, a number of resident amenities, I wanted to speak about our three major concerns. They're not necessarily the ones in order to our letter. Our first major concern is the parking maximum. The parking maximum will result in 0.357 maximum parking spaces per dwelling unit. And it will also result in a very low number of spaces for the grocery store. And as I'm sure everybody knows, in order to achieve a grocery store, which is not easy in New Haven, you really need adequate parking. And we know that this is as was said in the prior testimony, an isolated section of the case. It's really not walkable to Yale, 101 College, Alexion. So it's also an area that's not well served by public transportation. It's not very close to the train station. There's really, the Yale shuttle doesn't go there, and the Connecticut Transit services. So to make this project work, to make it feasible, the first thing we are doing is a market study, and we have to go to banks and investors and make sure we don't invest in it. And I've been told by the client, it is absolutely not financed. Now, this board adopted a maximum, the CDG district. The maximum is one parking space per unit, one parking space per 1,000 square feet, which is actually not as generous to us as the 1 for 400, 75% reduction, which is about 1 for 60. But what that section says, and what we're asking to be imported, is that if we do a traffic demand study and we show that we need this parking, it can be to the discretion of the city plan commission, can be increased. So that is in a sense a deal killer. And we ask that you look at that very, very carefully. The second thing, which is not as obvious, did our picture come up yet? I could just, what can I tell? Report it out. Oh, yes. Thank you. So this is a mapping study to show you what we're saying about. And as you will see from the orange rectangle, part of this parcel is really adjacent to I-95. It's within 500 feet of the on-off ramp. And we know, and by we, I mean criteria knows, that it can't be used for residential development. It's too noisy with vibrations. There's no office use, no within building office spaces. And so the all self-storage is not, we understand, one of the most favored uses in the city of New Haven is an appropriate sound barrier. And so what we're suggesting is that not the self-storage be permitted without any oversight, but that it be permitted in the harbor sub-district by means of a special permit for properties that are within 500 feet of the interstate. And I know that's very specific to our site, but it's critical to make it. And it's critical for the financing. So that's our second main concern. And then our third main concern deals with the open space. And there are three issues with respect to the open space. The first issue is the open space is prohibited for it to be surrounded by more than. And we're planning to have 4 open spaces that are available to the public. But because of the huge density, we think it's important, and it's throughout all the projects that you have approved or city plans approved, to have some private open space available to the residents of it. You know, just as I know I love my backyard in New Haven, just to have some private space. So our design shows 2 courtyards that are not 100% surrounded by, but 3/4% surrounded by walls. We think it's appropriate to have that kind of space as long as it's also providing public space. So we ask that prohibition again, that requirement that there can be no more than 2/3 walls around open space be changed in 2 ways. One, that it be changed to 3/4, and that it be changed to 3/4 under the understanding that people have to be providing public open space, so that we don't build Yale, we don't feel like that. And the second thing is that the second thing is that the open space requires contiguity, which I'm probably not pronouncing correctly. And we think some contiguity is fine, some open space. But, as we've seen in New Haven, there are all kinds of open space and necessarily big, large open spaces, like the roof decks,
patios, and that's the definition of open space of the document after the review hearing. That's, I mean, that's a whole variety. So we're saying, okay, 40% of the required 15,000 square feet of office space can be one space, but let us have the freedom to devise all kinds of different kinds of open spaces people who live there or the public may find helpful. And then the third issue, and it's hard to see here, but there are two basic residential areas, and then between them, it's a 30-foot path. And we envision that as an area that can support the restaurants, people can go at takeout, area where there might be art fairs or at farmers markets, that kind of area, public funds area that you see in the path. And the way the regulations are written, this is a technical thing, says you can't count paths. We don't know what those, this is a path or a plaza, but we want to eliminate that. The rest of the things are things that Alder Saban has talked about. You know, there's so many prescriptive regulations and the plan commission in its site plan review, particularly on not the sustainability, but the resiliency issues, have to make sure that no matter what that complies with everything. In addition, there'll be a coastal application will be required. So there'll be an enormous review over resiliency. It will be just the way stormwater is today, very closely reviewed in site plan. There's really no need for a special permit. It's going to discourage people like criterion. They're going to think we need to go to our investors and provide certainty that if we follow every tiny rule here, at which we have control over, we're going to get our permit, not that there's this special permit situation. There are other very other items which are in the letter, and I'm hopeful that the city plan department will take a look at some of those very technical items and make changes. I know it's getting late, so I'm going to turn over quickly to criterion, and if you can quickly summarize your concerns, because we're going to have them. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Good evening, honorable members of the Legislative Committee. Frank Sheila, this is Vicky Dyer, we're project manager of the Criterion Group on 601. Criterion is currently in the planning and design development stage of a mixed-use project, which would be subject to the zone we discussed tonight. Overall, there's a strong alignment here between the city's plans for the Long Wharf area and our sensibilities on residential projects. We seek to build high-density pedestrian-focused communities. Before the ink is dry in the zoning, we want to come with some insight from a business perspective on the two of the three key points that were discussed, parking and self-storage. So one of our suggestions as communicated in Carolyn's letter is the proposed MU zone permits self-storage within 500 feet of the highway. In our design development, we found that Interstate 95 presents a major infrastructural and strategic concern for the development of the Long Wharf. For this area, the state can use it for foot traffic and leisure activity, acoustic, vibrational, and aesthetic buffer between 95 and proposed dwellings will be key. There are several non-residential land uses that can act as this buffer, namely office space and self-storage. However, it's our experience that self-storage is the only option that's leasable and financeable in the current market conditions. Demand for office space has dropped considerably in recent years, and sound and vibration concerns would make 600 Long Wharf a less than favorable office market. What's more, among non-residential uses, self-storage generates very little traffic, infrastructural and sound burden on its own. Self-storage would generally not do its use and will act as kind of buffer that I-95 requires. In service to the goal of our new zone, we suggest that self-storage be allowed only directly adjacent to the highway. Our concern is shielding the new zone's primary uses and increasing their desirability and for parking. You know, another core business ask of ours is to remove the 75% parking maximum. We absolutely believe in discouraging sprawl and car dominance. For us as a developer, parking is a loss leader on our project, not a desired element itself. Our goal, which we suspect will be shared by any other developers in the area, is to build a minimum amount of parking operationally feasible. Such construction projects, however, are subject to vendor and partner requirements as dictated by their study of the project market. It's not in our interest to exceed the impositions set forth by those project studies from our lender and partners. While we believe projects like ours in this rezoning will go far in moving the city towards less car dependency, New Haven still today has a level of auto use that must be accounted for. The market will suggest a level of parking that we must entertain to preserve the project's financeability. The currently proposed parking maximum presents an external imposition on our lender's evaluation of developments here, which would eventually affect our ability to have financiers deploy capital and get this project built.
Okay, anyone there to answer any questions?
Quick question about the, in the proposed zone, there is a diagram of the streetscape, including a priority, the pedestrian priority zone, there's building amenity space, there's a maximum setback. I didn't feel like I fully understood exactly what it was trying to get at, and I was wondering if you had any concerns, I guess, or thoughts about what it was trying to suggest and then how it might impact, developments such as what you were describing.
I think we understand the general intention behind those elements of the proposed zoning amendment, but we certainly hope that we'll see some clarifications around what some of those elements mean and how they sort of work together on public roadways and private roadways. What we've accounted for here are fairly generous setbacks preliminarily, looking at like 15-foot something externally at range 100 meters, but because we will want to account for areas of seating, pedestrian walkways, space outside of retail shops that can be used for tables and chairs and gathering. So we're aware of it, and we believe we understand what the intention is and what it'll ultimately look like. But until the proposed language is finalized, we can't really say for certain what our proposed streets are going to look like.
But it sounds like regardless,
We think we can do it.
but regardless of what exactly is in the final zoning proposal, it sounds like you are planning anyway to include some kind of buffers and range.
Yeah, significant setbacks around our property lines. I don't know if you can tell on the diagram. Yeah, I apologize that it can't be on the screen, but we're using a private roadway that is situated between the residential portion of the development and the retail parking garage portion. That street too, there we're imagining on-street parking, significant setbacks or sidewalks, plaza in the middle that intersects with the 60-foot wide pedestrian plaza between the two residential developments. So we're thinking a lot about the pedestrian experience, and I know that pedestrian retail gathering experience is very important to the developer.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony that you have. As we also brought you like the youth unit, we'll move on to the next.
I'm one house with another drawing that means that like you have that shows the open spaces. Maybe with Ms. Mesa can make some more copies, and I will do that. Thank you. And to you as well. And thank you for your time. Thank you for your careful consideration of my comment.
I think I would like to offer that about
So, sure, really good, yeah, there's a couple of people.
Thank
Next would be John Knock from the Appalachian team.
will be a name. Thank you all. Please, state your names if that.
Sure. My name is John Malcolm, attorney, with an office at 147 Broad Street in Milford.
My name is Jack Dwyer. With also, the senior vice president of also, I will go to my address when you need something.
This is Sarah Sharp, I'm a land use attorney, and my office is at 147 Broad Street in Milford.
General counsel for the American Criminal Code.
Thank you.
And first of all, and we understand and appreciate the fact that you probably have read that letter. And so I will reread it. But I think, to start, I think a few data points to coin a phrase, are relevant. So Sergeant has been, and obviously we're here on behalf of Sergeant and the envoy, which owns the property and 100 Sergeant Drive. They've been there for nearly 160 years and employing 550 people, and the property is about 30 acres. I think the total zone is about 357. So I'm a lawyer, not an accountant, but we're somewhere less than 10%, but obviously a very sizable portion of the new zone. We understand and appreciate the very hard work that the city has gone through to get to this point, both on the plan and on the regulation numbers. It's a very exciting and important vision. I don't think you can underestimate the enormity of the project that your staff has gone through, and we appreciate that. We also very much appreciate the fact that Economic Development Administrator Piscatelli, Director Brown, Assistant Director Hogan agreed to meet with us last week on sort of an emergency basis, and they cleared their calendars and gave us a generous amount of time to discuss. As we're very appreciative of that as well. Nonetheless, we have, as we said in the letter, very grave concerns about the proposed rezoning, primarily because the rezoning would render our use as a non-conforming use. Obviously, under your regulations, that means we can do virtually nothing. Now, we haven't had a chance to fully analyze all the requirements in terms of the bulk requirements, but we probably would be a non-conforming structure as well. So either one of those, or certainly a combination of those, would completely handcuff us in terms of our ability to conduct or expand our business beyond what the current footprint is. And certainly, as an envoy, Sergeant very much wants to maintain their 160-year tradition here in the city of New Haven and go for another 160 years, but it'd be very difficult under these conditions. So we had talked with your staff, the three which I just mentioned, and we talked about how we can address this, how we can become part of the MU zone, but in a way that also works for Asshole and Sergeant. And we felt very strongly that while we think that given time, we can come up with an acceptable solution that can meet the city's goal as well as our goals, to maintain this very important employer in the city, sort of this legacy business that's sort of a foundation for the Long Wharf area, but at the same time, facilitates, the city's vision as well. And I think this vision recognizes Asshole. If you look at the Long Wharf plan, Asshole's building and its properties prominent. It's the innovation district. So, I'm not sure how we're going to get there, but I'm confident that we can. We're here in good faith. We know that the city and staff will operate in good faith. We know that the Board of Alders will as well. And so that's our goal. I know that, you're contemplating perhaps extending the moratorium. You're contemplating perhaps a phase 2 of the zone change. Whatever that context is, we're planning to continue to work with the city and staff and this committee, as well as the Board of Alders, to come up with an acceptable solution. But for the time being, if the Board of Alders is going to be taking a vote in the near future, we would simply ask that you not include our property in the MU zone. Just leave us as IL, and we will pledge to continue working with the city to come up with a solution where we can likely be in the MU zone. And listen, I fully recognize how difficult the process is that your staff is going through. On many occasions, every town and municipality was trying to overhaul the regulations, runs up against these issues, because once you start applying to specific sites, what looks very clear and apparent
starts to get much more confusing. So, hopefully we can be a partner of the city, a partner of your staff, and work collaboratively and figure this out. But it's gonna take some time, some patient problems. We don't have an architect here, we don't have an engineer, we don't have a planner. We have two lawyers, and we think we know what we're doing, but you know, I think we need some other consultants too, so we can really advise our clients. And so, I don't want to belabor it any more than that. I think the letter speaks for itself, and so we appreciate your time.
Any questions? No, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I know there's a representative from the Chamber of Commerce who indicated earlier that she wishes to testify, so she will come forward. I'm sorry, I didn't get her name. She'll tell. She arrives. Thank you.
Thank you. Please state your name and address.
My name is Katie Ambrosio. Like I mentioned, I'm here to represent the Division of Commerce. Our office is 900 Chapel Street in New Haven. And I serve policy and strategic communication specialist. So thank you for the opportunity to testify here today regarding this application. On behalf of the members of the Chamber, I am here as an advocate for the business community. We represent over 1,200 businesses across the region, including obviously the city of New Haven and the surrounding municipalities. And our mission is to be an active business, a valuable resource for our members, venue for connections, and a promoter of economic growth that is shared and inclusive. We've talked about today the importance of Long Wharf to the city of New Haven. It's well known for its culture, history, and all that it offers. Long Wharf welcomes visitors, residents, and businesses with its atmosphere and prime location right off the highway. And because of that, we are proponents of the Long Wharf District's continued development. And we believe that it is critical that we continue to add to its vibrancy, ensuring that it remains a welcoming district for businesses and visitors alike. This supports economic development and job growth in New Haven. We previously made comments or submitted testimony at the City Plan Commission's meeting in support of the Long Wharf application. And since then, we have become aware of the concerns of Alpha Alloy, which you all just heard from. At the Chamber, our main priority is to ensure that our local businesses are supported. And while the zoning changes will have benefits, we ask that the city ensure that our anchor businesses in the Long Wharf District are supported and not subject to new burdens as a result of the zoning changes. So obviously developer and business testified today, and we really lean on their expertise and their experience on how this will affect them, along with their suggestions. So we respectfully request that also Alpha's concerns that this proposal will impact their business and potential for future growth are addressed. They're asking to be excluded from the rezoning until such time as a proper study can be undertaken to understand any and all potential impacts of the proposal to their business operations. Critical because the proposed rezoning will render the existing Alpha facility non-conforming use, prohibiting enlargement, extension, or alteration of their existing building, and which they just testified to. And along with this, other restrictions associated with the rezoning could impact existing businesses. So we just ask for further collaboration there. Obviously, Alpha is an important member of our business community. They invest in the community. They provide hundreds of good paying jobs in manufacturing, and New Haven is the company's headquarters for the Americas. Addressing their concerns is good for our business community, and we believe that it sends a strong signal that New Haven partners with businesses. Again, the Long Wharf District is a critical neighborhood of the city and we support its growth. We're still supportive of the proposed changes to the district, but they must be done in a way that protects our established businesses and addresses their concerns. We are committed to economic development initiatives, specifically those that include partnerships with local companies in the district. Again, we ask that you support the development plan while addressing Alpha's requests and any other businesses in that district. We're working with you on this, and thank you for your consideration.
Any questions? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Madam Chair, this is all, everybody on the list.
All right. So this time I will ask if there are any members of the public wishing to please come forward.
Yes, and it's just forward, and it's 59 Elm Street. And I work with the new urban design, and I have just a few comments. I do think that listening to the conversation tonight, that it does sound like a good idea to consider some way to extend the moratorium. There are a lot of very good questions that come up that are going to need some time. So, you know, in general, I support the direction that this is going in, but as everyone has recognized, the combination of this being in a critical flood zone and the fact that this is such an unusual and important opportunity for the city to expand and get it right, that it really is worth the time to ensure that we get there. I did want to address your question about public participation. To get to the general plan 2019, there was very significant participation, and there was a pattern that there would always be a meeting on the west end and a meeting on the east end. And in this case, there was never any meetings on the east end, closer to downtown in Worcester Square. So I think some of the questions you've raised about how does all they're saying about how this connects into neighborhoods, I think does need some more attention. And we do need to, if we can have some time to bring it back to some community discussion in these areas. If we can do this, something else I'd like some clarification about. I realize it's late and there's many things you need to continue doing tonight. Would be a little more discussion about the difference between public and private streets and how you establish them. With the standard, I'd just like to learn more about that. And then I'm very glad to see the beginning of full-based code coming into the city. I don't feel this plan really gets there. It's beyond having strong street walls. I think that a lot of form-based codes really looks at the ratio of the building height to the width of the street and the uses behind the building, particularly right on the street, so that you actually create an environment that people feel comfortable. It isn't a canyon, it's often setbacks, either front and back. So I think there's probably some more dimensional aspects of this that might be needed, particularly when you get to the tall buildings. And although building in this area that's still will probably require for a tall building massive piles, I do see it as an area that could have tall buildings as long as they're engineered and as long as canyons are created. One of the things that I think is, and I'd like to just raise a question that some people brought to us. If we can have some information on electric and utility plants, the old law more under Mayor Lee actually, it was a requirement that there were no above ground electric lines. And in some ways, you could say that's still a good idea, particularly if we're worried about hurricanes. But I'm wondering, with all of the new development, what is the thought about how that's going to be brought into the area with increases in use and demand? So that's just a general question, and that's been brought to us. I'm also concerned about what we heard from your group. I didn't know who was calling. It sounds like many interesting things. I can't remember the name of the company. I don't want to just say you guys. Criteria.
when you think of the amount of frontage the city has up against highways between 91 and 95, if we were to say that within 500 feet of all the highways, it's a dense zone that perhaps only self-storage units could be in, we'd be creating a pretty dismal city, a low quality use or low value use. So I think that needs to be looked at. And to think about what are the building standards that can actually address things like vibration and noise, that maybe it's really building standards within that. We have public schools that are closer to 500 feet, and we didn't understand when things like Conte were built that that wasn't a good idea. But a lot has been done with planting trees, changing out windows, triple things. So I'd be highly concerned about that. And I think that I don't know how to integrate the creation of a new zone in an area that needs so much public investment to make it work right. There was discussion of dry egress, and I remembered some early meetings that led up to the 2019 plan. There was only one area somewhat to the east that the state recognized as a possible dry egress. And some discussion was made about the pedestrian bridge that would go near the Union Station area and actually do two things at once. Provide safe escape route if necessary, but also allow for the building of a multi-use parking garage on the other side of the track to serve Union Station. So I think there's things like these bridges and dry egress that are really about public investment that needs to, I think we all need to hear more how that works. And then transit planning, in a way, that's another thing that before getting into the zone, and I'm very glad to see parking maximums, I even like to see it lowered more. I understand what we've heard from criteria, but if we keep saying that we have to keep building garages because we haven't invested in transit, we keep making poor quality urban environments. That in the beginning of this, we need to create some sort of system, as many cities and towns have done, that to do buildings or development on a certain scale, you invest in creating transit to serve. That's how Cambridge has been able to maximize its use, like us, their land form, and they needed to do that. It'd be interesting to look at the current proposal, which I understand is going to be reworked and edited. It's going to be a lot of work in the next few weeks, and to think of what could be the maximum square footage built, or the minimum, or for what the zoning could do. What would be the maximum amount of parking that could happen, the minimum, and think of the square footage of parking as a proportion to the total building. Because one of the most important things we've learned from organizations like the Parking Reform Network, the work of Donald Shoup, is that cities are flushing money down the drain with overbuilt parking, that those could be more productive uses for the city. So in addition, and ironically, to the production of pollution, both that harms human health and harms our environment, and leads to more issues of climate change and flooding. If anything, this should be the zone that we start right away with. How are we getting public-private partners to invest in transit so we really have a plan? So I feel like there's a cart before the horse, with parking before the transit, that we're diverting down path. The parking report network is available to cities and developers to engage to discuss things. And, I think it would be very good to, if we had a moratorium or if it was just this, very intense effort to work, if you don't think that that's feasible, to bring them into a conversation. And we'd be very happy to help facilitate that. So, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm gonna ask again, if there are any members of the board wishing to testify? For a second time, if there are any members of the public wishing to testify on this item? And one final time, is there any members of the public wishing to testify on this item? Seeing none,
Madam Chair, we have item 3 on our agenda. And we would need to move to that before we make any motion.
I'm gonna ask for a 10-minute recess in between, now and number 3. All right, we're going to take a 10-minute recess.
We presented together, yes, and with that, that already. Together. But they will need. Yeah. Several years.
Good for a fair. That's good for us. Yeah. When did it get signed? When did it get signed? But there. Gotta go to Mike's. Right? I would not. Mike's smart. Another road. I think I'll look at the year and do that. We're doing all the special cultures. What is triggered by being. We'll just wait and guess. Special because it's still a high on July 4, how we. There's a couple of hundred. Our cave is fine. Rolling out. And rapidly got the floor. It's definitely probably a handful. Formula. We identify this. Is this petition, one of these sets of provisions, you know, then we're going to give them. It won't be any more people than 3 months. Like this, what's our city where you can't do that? Was certainly. Uses by something. I problem that you don't find them drive. It starts from empty, the same spot. So, like that's a big problem. You know, get yeah. If you're going to use it, get a new wall. So
That's but what I'm suggesting, right now, the change is, you know, special permit. What I'm suggesting, take this stuff. I could use for one of these. And then the person is not the. What do you say more? Special permit. Yeah. How long? Yeah.
My friends and family.
They're used, they're in like. For some. And you want to use there would be plenty for. Next door to market. There was. Almost at least this time. I can be learned about that. You know, discretion. Take care about it.
So much. Here are some of you who are in number 3 about the nation will be added to previous conception.
Please state your names and addresses for the record. My name is Alfred Heimer. My address is 107 Carlton. Family Rivera Barrios, 19-21 Chester Street.
My name is Beth Birkin. I'm a recently hired attorney that's going to be assisting the board.
Thank you so much. So we have driver's issues. Basically, that was changed for the changes that we want for the moves. So the Civilian Review Board, ordinance, was only written a few years ago. And the first round of individuals who were appointed to the board have gone through the appointments and switched around a couple of individuals. And so we've given us a chance, the board a chance to see where the ordinance can be improved and changed, so that the fundamental aspects of the purpose of the Civilian Review Board can better be formed. These changes are sort of the end product of a number of meetings and discussions that were happening over the past 2-3 years or so, since 2021. There were also in this particular draft a number of changes that look like they've been made. They're most please do refer to the two documents of the red one and the original one. The biggest changes that we've had affect 4 main issue areas. The first was that quorum for our meetings is defined, and when we had only 8 active members of the board, it's very debilitating. We made it so that many of our meetings didn't actually have quorum, so cases couldn't be voted on to be investigated, which was the main focus of the work. And so removing that quorum requirement, going based on when the statute is for the rest of the majority, it's going to significantly influence the amount of work that the board can do, and we can talk about it forward. The second biggest thing that's being changed in is augmenting membership definitions and the membership process, allowing community members to self-select, offer themselves up as potential board members to represent CMTs instead of waiting on the CMTs to nominate them. That nomination procedure is supposed to last for 90 days before the mayor can then choose a member of the public. That 90 days then gets added to by how long it takes for the mayor's office to submit a recommendation to the board of holders. Then it goes to the automatic affairs and then to raise the board of holders. And before you know it, you're looking at 7 months to wait for an appointment for a seat that we was vacant last year. So changing a couple of different things, allowing people to self-identify interested, and also changing the process of resignation of a board member so that when they resign, they have to do some in writing and sort of 60 days before they can basically that is going to close that gap for the vacancy and make it possible for continue to do work. We've also included a membership definition so that people who represent community management teams are actually trying to live in the districts in which they serve, so as to be better representative of those communities. Not a specific requirement, but we feel that it better adheres to the spirit of what was intended in the ordinance. And then lastly, not making voter registration be a requirement of a board member for all to consider, because in section 2-799, it states that the board
for civilian review board should reflect the diversity of the city. And the New Haven Police Department serves people in the city, whether they're registered or not. And so we thought that it would be important to have people who might not register in the city, who might not be, might be being card holders, might not be able to vote because of past conviction, might be people that we would still want to serve on civilian people. Will be one of the more important things that's in the ordinance already is that the police department has 5 days between when they receive a complaint from the public and when they should be board. We wanted to move that section up in importance in the ordinance to reflect how much that time matters. The sooner we get a complaint, the sooner we can start to do our own investigation and make sure that the person, and the person who is submitting those complaints feels heard. And that's a really important part of building that relationship with the community, and making sure that people can, can feel that they have seen some kind of to make sure that those people feel like they're being heard appropriately and they're being respected, that their concerns are being addressed fully. The ordinance already said that investigations run by the CRB should be concurrent. But right now, we're really only able to investigate cases once they're already closed by internal affairs. And so, again, restating that timeline and making sure that things are being done concurrently is of the utmost important. And then lastly, we removed some of the ambiguous language governing investigations in some of the sections, specifically section 2-802, and then add the ability, even if we, for forum reasons or whatever time reasons, the chief has made a decision about just plan. Something has to happen quicker than we're able to review and make a recommendation that we would be able to recommend that either case could be reopened if we felt it needed further examination, or that a recommendation about perhaps, general orders or procedure or training requirements might be able to be made even if a disciplinary action is already taken. So that's basically what we everyone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Could you say a few words about the process that you all went through to come to these recommendations, and who was involved in those discussions? Thank you.
So we started this process with talking to all board members, having meetings, discussing with the chief of police, internal affairs. Also we met with one of the police the Lamar, Attorney Lamar. And also we met with Attorney as well. And so now we ended up kind of putting it all together and sorting through what was important, not important, and also it was us in particular, and giving thought. So it's really important for us to move forward in a positive way for the community, and also working with the police department so that we can make things better.
Thank you for that description. How confident do you feel that these set of recommendations have the full support of the folks who are currently civilian review board?
I would say so the only thing on here that was questionable in our discussion was about individuals not needing to be registered to vote. That was for discussion. But other than that, everybody was in agreement with it.
I'm glad you brought that up because I thought that the wording was really interesting because, there's reasons why people might not register to vote. You know, there's plenty of people who are perfectly eligible to vote if we don't register. And we try to register them and encourage them to vote. Then there are people who are not eligible to register because they're not citizens. And so the wording here is a little bit confusing because we've had discussion in our charter revision process about whether we should open up membership to boards and commissions to folks who are non-electors. And in that context, we've been talking about people who are not eligible to vote. Not that I just haven't registered because I moved here from Hamden, for example. Like not registering to vote is not. I don't think that's quite what you're talking about. Are you talking about opening up membership in the CRB to folks who are non-citizens who are not eligible to vote because of their citizenship status?
So that was up for discussion, and some of the members thought that that is something that we should do so that we can have membership that represented, you know, diversity throughout the city. And some other members didn't agree with that. They thought that, you know, it's responsible for us to register to vote, and we do. And so therefore, how can we ensure that if they're not even registered to vote, that they can be an active part in this process? So it was up for debate, and that is one of the topics that we did not, you know, all agree.
Last question, if I may, Madam Chair, which is about, you know, the police department is regulated by lots of different things, including collective bargaining agreements. The police board of commissioners has jurisdictional authority over certain matters, and there are timeframes that apply that ensure rights to the accused under the CBAs and under other procedures. And so how thoroughly have you kicked the tires on some of your procedural recommendations and whether or not those procedural changes would actually mesh and be harmonious, or at least not conflict with collective bargaining agreements and other applicable regulations?
Yeah, so what I will say, there are no changes to the ordinance that we proposed that haven't already been vetted by the Board of Alders in that regard. Those sections remain unchanged, actually formatting or capitalization of the Board of Alders. The substantive changes that we set forth, as you know, when it comes to when we receive complaints are already in here, and they're also heavily in the bylaws, and so those things have been, you know, well viewed and vetted by the department. She's as well aware of those time, you know, commitments that have been made. And none of that's changing. It's just reiterating each section of the ordinance to make it stand out in importance because we felt that it was miscategorized document. That's all. But you know, it's a 5-day timeline to receive complaints. It's a 90-day timeline for us to review and get recommendations to achieve those times.
Another document, did you guys receive a second of this stuff? Because I can see that the chair is looking at something that was yesterday, and that was kind of the second round of revisions, and there are some tweaks to different timeframes that are, not that one, this looks like this. Yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
Right, it's the second portion. So there's the ordinance, just the second, the document that doesn't. Yeah, there's 3 versions. There's the red line version, the non-red line weekly version of the changes, and then the version for it. As well as the section paying charter. This area charter.
Because that's what's confusing, that's why we thought it was important.
But this, I think, does set up some, maybe some different timeline